Position. I've included this link in your module, and I think it's really important to just kind of spend a little time looking through this. I'm going to walk you through a couple items. I will do a whole session on the rule of thirds, but here is a classic example of you want your focal point to be within one of these crosshairs. And so you want to, as it says here, place the important elements of the scene along one of the lines. And so where these crosshairs cross one another is a really great way to kind of think about when you're composing your picture. Think about when you compose music, they write the music, they tell the story with music. Here we're telling our story with photos. And so I think it's really important that we begin to think about, as we compose a picture and you get ready to take a picture, where do these lines fall within your frame? So as you look through all of these examples, here's a great one of there's lots of things going on here, but the story is told and you know exactly where to look. Your focal point is this big building right here, and it falls, as you have seen, there's really not a hard and fast rule to associate with the rule of thirds. It's not like it has to be straight in the middle of this line right here, or you're going to fail the class and have a horrible picture. It's not really like that. It's just really a good guideline. Here is a great example of them breaking the rule of thirds, but it's still wonderful composition. Composition can make up anything, including the rule of thirds, including framing, including the symmetry, including patterns. It's kind of a culmination of all of these concepts, and it means different things for different pictures. In a perfect world, I would be able to give you a definition of composition, and I would be able to tell you exactly what to do and how to do it. But that's not art, and that's what this is really just another form of art. And so here's a great example of symmetry. So you've got the exact same thing. It's centered right in the middle. You see this little faded white line here. It's showing you, look how beautifully composed this is. If you're going to have something centered in the frame, make it perfectly centered, and it will do wonders for your image. You'll also hear me talk a lot about leading lines, and I think this is a great example. These stairs are lines that are leading your eye to a focal point. So we could argue different focal points for different images, but you never want your viewer of your photo to question where they're supposed to be looking. You want them to know exactly what they're looking at. And so if you lead them with a line, like these stairs and this bridge are both all great lines, if you lead them up to the focal point, then they're not confused. It's a really clean, easy to interpret photograph. You can read a little bit about foreground interest and depth. So landscapes are a little bit different than portraits, which is what I shoot. But you can see here that they've pointed this out, that, hey, look, there's this really awesome interest in the foreground, and there's really awesome interest in the background. And so this leads your eye to the waterfall. All of these rocks here lead your eye up to the waterfall. So this is a beautifully composed photograph. To be grounded within a photo is also really important. So you see here the this little link here on the sidewalk is grounding you. It's showing you perspective. It's showing you how far away you are in the photo from this beautiful building. So the building is really your focal point, but you have a leading line here, this sidewalk leading you to something that's kind of grounding you and giving you perspective and scale. And so I really think adding this foreground interest and adding something that kind of leads you to the image, it shows you the reflection, it kind of frames you and brings your eye up to these reflections. And then the big grand finale here, which is your buildings, is really kind of easy to see and easy to understand where you're supposed to look, because it's all been framed and composed beautifully for you. Framing is a really cool thing. I'll show you a few examples of framing in a moment, but here they use the architecture of this art to frame their focal point, which is this building. And so I think that is a really great way to use framing. Here they didn't use a building. They used these trees and the water to frame the focal point, which is this house. And so you'll see here is a great example of composition. Remember I said composition is a lot of different concepts pushed together into one of how the image looks within the frame. So we've got the rule of thirds being followed because this house is our focal point, and they've laid this house along with one of those lines, if you envision that tic-tac-toe game, over your image. And then we have framing. And I also would argue that this bank right here is a really beautiful leading line. It's leading you to this reflection, which leads you to the house. And so this is a complicated photo, but it really tells a beautiful story, and there's a lot going on, but you have no doubt in your mind when you look at it where you're supposed to look. Here are some more examples of leading lines. They've drawn them out right here for you, leading you straight to the Eiffel Tower. Very beautiful. We'll also talk about patterns, and these squares make really, really beautiful patterns. So I think it's important too to see our brains as humans. We like order and repetition and patterns because our brains don't like to think very hard. We are humans, but we don't like to use our brains, if that makes sense. So the easier you can make it on your person viewing your photo, utilizing patterns, utilizing repetition, and utilizing leading lines, the better. I'm going to scroll down a little bit here. Here's a great example of these patterns. So these aren't perfect straight lines. These look like perfect straight lines leading you to this beautiful building. But there's also this pattern, this scallop shape, adding interest to the image, but not taking away from the focal point. So that's really interesting perspective. So I'll encourage you to kind of scroll through here. Here's a really cool one, rule of thirds, and how they have filled the frame completely. So if you're gonna break the rules, break them big. If you're gonna fill the frame and you don't wanna follow the rule of thirds, then fill your frame with a face. Make sure that face totally covers your entire image, because once again, you don't want your viewer to have questions about where they're looking. So negative space is another thing we've talked a lot about in the design modules, but it happens here too. So the story being told here is, wow, look at this amazing statue. It's beautiful, it's historic, this is great. But the setting and the background and this negative image that's created by the clouds and the blue sky also adds to the story. It gives this negative space that kind of draws you in. So don't be afraid to either fill the frame like they did here, or back up and show some negative space. Show us what's going on around you. I'll allow you to continue through this. There are a lot of different options here, but this is just a really great starting point and a really great resource on this website to show you lots of examples of really beautiful composition. So I hope you got something out of this.